timing marks are on this crankshaft pulley and they correlate to the timing case. For the block anyway. For the head, you have to take this case off. So you don't want to take this pulley off first if you're trying to put it in time. It's always a good idea to put it in time. So we've got the triangle right here. That correlates to that white paint, but that white paint is not always visible. Sometimes it's gone. You have to come down here and feel it right there. We've got a notch on both sides of the pulley. So we're gonna match up these notches to this little stamped triangle in the case. You can barely detect and barely feel it. Right about there. And then the white paint is supposed to line up. If you're just taking the crankshaft pulley off, for instance, to reseal the timing case, you don't have to put it in time. Does not matter. Just zip it off with an impact or use this special tool that I'm about to show. Is it possible to crash valves if you take an engine apart without putting it in time first? So it is always smart to at least line her up before you pop the cams because they can jolt. Very carefully thumb this bolt out by hand, or if you use a ratchet, make sure you're pulling evenly straight on the crankshaft pulley. Do not aggravate this bolt hole because the only thing holding it in time are the chains, 3 chains: oil pump chain, balance shaft chain, and camshaft timing chain. If you don't have the spacer like you're supposed to use, you can screw this bolt in all the way. It won't bottom out, but you're supposed to definitely hold this all together with that bolt. This crankshaft pulley is keywayed. It will only go on one way. Make sure the fat pizza slice is lined up with that intermediate gear. Otherwise, you'll have a vacuum leak and your crankshaft pulley will wobble. I pried a little bit from the very top ridge and then a flathead screwdriver or a thin chisel from that bottom corner. The case usually pops off pretty easily. The timing chain actually looks pretty good and it seems to be in time. If you get one of those cheap timing kits, it'll come with this tool, this reverse thread. It'll also come with that counterhold tool for a harmonic balancer or crankshaft pulley. The screen is blown out in the camshaft adjuster, very common. And sometimes it comes out in fragments, and sometimes it gets crammed in the cylinder head sideways and restricts the oil flow. This time it broke in one big fat piece. That could damage some things with restricted oil flow. Now, just for the fun of it, let's take this oil filter housing off. There we are. I don't know if I can do it with the oil filter on there or not. The water pump union stayed in the water pump side. Here we have the coolant temp sensor. Some people ask how to get to it or replace it. It's a little bit difficult. You could take the throttle body off and get to it fairly easily. A little security tab. Sticky. I have to use the pick. You would have to push down on these tabs. And wiggle this thing out. It'd be better just to rip this and break this and have a spare clip. I wouldn't want to reuse that clip anyway. But just as a challenge, pop it out, save the clip, pop the coolant temp sensor out. Probably a smart idea to also change the O-ring I just dropped. I don't really preventatively maintenance replace the coolant temp sensor because the OEM ones last a long time. I trust OEM over aftermarket on the coolant temp sensor. Very few malfunctions with this. I'm not doing anything else with the timing chain right now. Let's go over here to the intake manifold. Release some wiring, knock sensor wire. Just kind of pull down on this trigger tab. It's a little bit tricky. And then I'm gonna do the same thing for all of these. And just this one's fighting me. Get this. We're gonna hit it with a little 13mm ratchet wrench up top till it gets loose enough to unscrew. And then that stud there will hold it good enough for us to yank this tin triple out. Let's take this goofy pipe off that goes to the heater core. So we got a T30 way back here. My ratchet's already trying to switch directions on me just from simply spinning it like this really quickly. Magnetic tip. Pretty good one actually. I'll organize that here in a second. biting me a little bit. Let's go back to the power tools. Let's just take the water pump off. We got the cover. Now we got 5 bolts. That one, I guess you might not have seen it. Up top, down bottom. Let's go ahead and see, the throttle body's in the way. Can't really get a straight shot on it. So, let's grab the super long one again. I could have gone short as well, but it's just easier for me to reach it like this. It was leaking. See that? It's evidence of a leaking water pump at the seal, the weep hole. I've never actually had to replace the gasket behind this breather case, and I don't typically take off this engine mount. If you want to replace the belt for the water pump, feel free to do so. I don't typically see an issue. I've never experienced an oil leak from this crankshaft position sensor either, but I've replaced many of rear main seals. You're gonna wanna make sure to at least take these 2 bolts out because we'll be taking the pans off, the upper and lower. Also, when you mount it, make sure to not mount your stand arms on the upper oil pan. If you do want to replace this water pump belt, it goes all the way through the balance shaft assembly. So you might need to counter hold the crankshaft, and you might also need one of these deep dish box ends. Reverse thread, remember. So we're going to try to tighten it to loosen it. It's counterintuitive. And look at how much slack we're pulling. We're pulling all that slack from the tensioner. Hopefully it doesn't skip. I come all the way down here and give it a nice jolt if I can get all of it in the frame. I think I broke it loose. All the spark plugs are out of the engine right now, so I might have to actually counter hold. Yeah, it's not loosening at all. Now when it's on the stand, what I could do is, see, this is in the way as well, but I could pop out this freeze plug, which that doesn't actually go to anything, and I could zip it off with an impact, or maybe even a right angle impact. But ideally, I would like to just crank it off. And I counter hold it right here, and hopefully it doesn't take too much. So we're gonna go this way, right. And I'm gonna have to mount this camera. Now that I held the crankshaft, this is loose. I still gotta get in here with my fingers and spin it the rest of the way. Remember, reverse thread, so counterintuitive. Not much room in there. Not enough resistance to use your ratchet wrench. Kind of a pain. And almost there. What trim you got? Half a finger. More teardown in part 2.